In this video, we're going to look at how to use Google Sheets in order to construct a variety of graphs and how we can transfer those graphs into a Google document or Microsoft Word. So the first thing that you'll need to do is, in a blank Google Sheet, we want to set up all of the variables of the graph we want to construct. So if we're constructing a graph that measures the distance traveled by specific types of paper airplanes, as well as the amount of air time each design of paper airplane can get, we need to set up the axes like this. So as we discussed in class, remember that the type of airplane has to be the independent variable, because this is the only variable that we have control over, because we've decided which design of paper airplane we want to fold, and depending on that design, that's going to affect how far the paper airplane travels and how long the paper airplane is going to stay in the air. So you can see that our independent variable is listed all the way on the left, and then to the right of that we have our two dependent variables. Now, because this is just a demonstration of how to make the graphs, I'm just going to make up a bunch of numbers. So this means that our basic dart plane flew 3 meters, our sprinter flew 4 meters, and the Navy plane flew 5 meters. Again, I've just pulled these numbers out of thin air. And then let's go ahead and make up some random numbers for airtime. Let's go 5 seconds for the basic dart, 6 seconds for the sprinter, and 7 seconds for the Navy plane. Again, do not use these numbers. This is what you are doing your own experiment about. I'm simply using this to show you how to graph. Now, as discussed in class, when we have two different dependent variables, we actually need to make two different graphs. So what we're going to do is we're going to make the distance graph first. So I'm going to highlight the top left square of my graph, or of this table, and then I'm going to highlight all of the relevant data. So we need all three of the different types of planes and all three examples of the distance that they traveled. So, and it's important here that we have our different units, our different variables actually labeled with the units indicated here, because Google Sheets can actually do a lot of the work for us. Next, we're going to go to Insert, and then if we select Chart, it should give us a chart which is some form of scatter plot graph as our default. And we want to change this because this is not continuous data. We're not measuring a quantitative measurement on our dependent variable. So under the chart editor that pops up here, you're going to go to chart type and you're going to drop down and you can select a column chart, also known as a bar graph here. And when we click this, we can see that the bar graph pops up like this. Now, what we need to double check is that our title includes both of the variables that we've identified, and because we highlighted the variables in our data, it indicates distance traveled, which is our dependent variable, measured versus the type of paper airplane used, which is our independent variable. And we can see the dependent variable is on the y-axis where it should be, and the independent variable is on the x-axis where it should be. So as long as the units and the variables are indicated on the right correct axes, distance traveled and type of paper airplane, we're actually good, and this graph is perfectly serviceable. But we can take a look at a few additional options in order to add additional details to this. So if we go to customize, there are a few other options that we can use. If we go down to grid lines and ticks, grid lines are simply the lines that correspond to units on each of the axes. So if we want to put spaces in between, so let's say that you measured a 3.5 distance, for example, and we want to be able to see where that is. If you click minor grid lines, you can see that units in between each of the units indicated on the axis are now visible. Alternatively, what you can do instead of putting in minor grid lines is that you can put ticks which indicate subdivisions along the axis here rather than individual grid lines. These are not necessary, but are sometimes helpful if you want to make the graph more readable. One additional way that you can specify and make the measurements clear on the graph is if you go to Series, you can go down and insert and click here on data labels, and here it will show the exact measurement on the graph of each of the different types of planes and the specific measurement that you measured when you did your trial. But again, these aren't necessary as long as the data in your graph matches the data in the data table that you've given. So the final thing we want to be able to do is transfer this graph into a Google document. So if you click these three dots, you can click copy chart like this. And if you remember the shortcut Control V, or on Mac laptops Command V, we can go into a blank Google Doc and hit Control V. You're going to be given a prompt that gives you the option to paste a link to the spreadsheet. That's not what we want because we just want the graph. So I'm going to click Paste Unlinked, and now we have our graph in a Google document like this. So the first thing we'll probably need to do is resize it because you don't need your graph to take up half of the page. Now the frustrating part here is if you try moving the graph around, you can't do it because the graph is locked in place. So in order to do this, or in order to move this graph, you need to right click on the graph and you're going to go down to Image Options, and you're going to click on this drop down menu here, Text Wrapping, and if you click Wrap Text, what this will allow you to do is move the graph freely around, and basically any text that you put into this document will go on either side of the graph so that you can get text. Let me just demonstrate this here. So if we put some text in, either the text will be displaced by the graph, or if you are typing in actual full sentences, what this will do is allow the text to be written, and then the next word will appear on the opposite side of the graph like this. And again, it allows you to move the graph around in a Google document freely. Now, just to make sure that we know how to construct the other graph here, there are two ways if you've made the data table like this. One is to actually, what we're going to do is just copy this here. So if we copy our airtime here, all we need to do is select all of this data, the type of plane and the airtime, and just repeat the same steps. I'm going to create my chart. And here we see, because it remembers that we made a column chart, it will give us a column chart here. And then if we check our title, it lists both of the variables, airtime and type of paper airplane, lists the dependent variable on the y-axis and the independent variable on the x-axis, so we are good. If you don't want to bother with this, what you can do is highlight each of the columns independently. So I'm going to click here, hold Shift and click down to highlight the type of paper airplane, my independent variable column. Then I'm going to click Control to highlight airtime, and while still holding down Control, I'm going to click Shift and click the bottom cell there, and then that means that this data here is what's selected. And then if we go to Insert Chart, it gives us exactly the same chart as we would have found otherwise, and then all you need to do is repeat the same steps to copy this second graph into your Google document where you'll be writing your formal lab report.